The Monster Guys podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Monster Guys podcast. I'm D.C. McGannon, and as always, I'm here with my partner and co-conspirator in all things creative, C. Michael McGannon. Michael, we've got a change of season upon us.
We do. It's warmer, and yet I'm still having to bundle up most of the time, so my body doesn't know what to do with it.
Well, I mean, it got a little bit chilly today, and that wind was pretty brutal the last few days, but I think we've got a warm spring on its way.
Hopefully. My Floridian side is ready for some warmth and sunlight.
Yeah, it's not been a brutal winter where we are, but it hasn't been fun nonetheless.
Yeah, again, that wind yesterday especially, I was walking uphill against it, and it felt like some epic metal cover without all of the guitar and fanfare.
Well, tonight we talk the Dullahan. He is a fantastic, dark, and fierce character, and I absolutely love him. And I can't wait to hear and talk about some of the things that we're going to be sharing about the Dullahan tonight. I don't know about you, but he's one of my favorite creatures.
I'm really excited. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he is most of the time. I think most people know the Headless Horseman, but that's all they know about him is that iconic image.
Yeah, and that's a bit watered down. It's not completely true to the legend. It's just kind of inspired by, so there's a lot more to him. He's got a lot of depth. I'm excited to dive in. Before we talk about the Dullahan, anything cool happening this week?
Well, I guess I could show my geeky side here. I splurged on a board game.
Oh.
Got an expansion to go with it.
What board game?
It's called Chaos in the Old World.
It's a game you've had your eye on for a while.
It is. I've been reading snippets of the rule book all day long. It's been fun.
And by the looks of it, I'm looking at it, I think, and by the looks of it, you'll probably be reading that rule book for some time.
It's a pretty thick rule book for a board game, yeah.
Pretty thick rule book.
Well, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, I guess.
Anything cool for you this week?
Well, yeah, just tonight. I just returned from our friends Axis and Vix and their inaugural Sanctum Dark Dance event here in Tulsa. So it was a good event. A lot of good people, great music, and I'm just excited for them to get this thing off the ground. If you've listened to our podcast at all, you've heard their music a couple of times. Just a wonderful couple, and I'm very happy for them getting that new event off the ground. So I was excited just to go and hang out and be a part. Really, I just kind of shared a drink and watched and listened.
Congrats, guys.
Yeah, congratulations to both of you.
Glad it went over well.
And we also went to a hockey game this week.
Right. I'm not a sports fan at all. I kind of get bored and usually go find a book or something if football's on the TV, but that was actually really exciting to watch. And there was only one fight, so it wasn't exciting just for like the brawling.
Yeah, I was looking for more fights because, a hockey game, I am a sports fan. I can't say I'm a huge hockey fan. Not that I don't like it, just that I don't know a lot about it, other than I love seeing guys just smashed up against the wall.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah, so I was happy to see that. It was just cool to see Nathaniel, our 8-year-old, jump around and be silly with it all and just kind of be in the atmosphere and have some fun. So I thought it was kind of weird, though, and I don't know the rules, but, at one point I stepped out to go get one of those horns for Nathaniel to blow and goof off with when they scored their touchdowns, or what I call touchdowns, their points, their goals. And I come back, and the other team's goalie wasn't there anymore. And I didn't know what happened to that.
Well, there's so much going on the field that I actually looked over right before you showed back up.
On the field. Touchdown and on the field. We're showing the fact that we have no idea what we're talking about with regards to hockey.
I don't know what to call it. Is it called an ice rink?
It's called the ice. On the ice.
But, I looked down there and they were changing people out so rapidly and so often that I hardly even noticed one person leaving. And yeah, the goalie was was just nowhere to be seen in the box or on the ice or anywhere.
So I thought that was strange. Maybe somebody who knows a little bit about hockey can explain that, but the goalie was gone for like probably at least 5 minutes that I saw, if not longer.
Yeah, and it was actually at the end of the game.
And so where did he go, and why didn't the opposing team score any points without a goalie down there?
They were trying.
I know,
I did see
but
they were trying.
I don't know. If it were me down there, I would have just thrown that puck right in that little net and boom, 3-point shot.
Grab it and do it.
Do they have 3-point shots in hockey?
I don't even know.
I don't know. Touchdown. I don't care. Touchdown. Thank you very much. So yeah, that was exciting. Hockey game. I'm sure maybe we'll catch another one. I don't know. I just want to see more guys' faces smashed into the plexiglass, and I was surprised there wasn't any blood. Maybe you got to jump up a league to get more blood in hockey.
Yeah, this is Oklahoma after all.
Yeah, we have ice hockey team in Oklahoma.
I don't know how that happened.
That's kind of strange. You know, it's kind of like us when we lived in Orlando and we had a hockey team in Orlando. How do you have ice in a state like that? I don't know. So anyway, the Dullahan, let's start with the whole headless horseman thing and maybe a little bit of pop culture, because that's what a lot of people recognize. People recognize the headless horseman from Washington Irving's story. That kind of gets the stereotyped view of the Headless Horseman, and that's not completely accurate. It's an inspired tale, but it doesn't hold up under pressure.
Yeah, and apparently, I mean, Washington Irving had heard different variations of the tale in his day and age that were kind of spin-offs, if you will, from the original tale as well. But, you know, you have that iconic black rider on the black horse, sometimes breathing fire, and for that tale, you know, the pumpkin or the jack-o'-lantern in his hand. And it's reminiscent of the Dullahan, but it's not completely true to form. I always found it interesting that they did have the jack-o'-lantern in hand, because originally the Dullahan himself carries his head in his hand, but it's his actual head.
Yeah, it's not a pumpkin.
No, and it's this grotesque,
moldy
thing. Yeah, the skin is like moldy cheese.
Yeah,
according to old authors, and it has this freakish grin that is distorted and sharp and just completely inhuman.
Yeah, whereas the Headless Horseman in the American story is simply a jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah,
and he's throwing it at Ichabod Crane in the story at one point because he can't cross the bridge because he's a ghost.
Which is another thing that did not come from the Dullahan.
Right.
In fact, the Dullahan. Well, we'll get to it later, but nothing could stop the Dullahan almost.
Yeah, he's an unstoppable force. That's why I love him. He's just an amazing beast of a monster. And listen, when he calls your name, your time's up, literally. And well, I think something else interesting to note is that going back to that pop culture Headless Horseman figure, in the town of Sleepy Hollow in New York, did you know that the high school, their mascot is the Headless Horseman? It's considered to be the scariest mascot in America.
I did not.
I think that's fascinating, pretty cool. I think I might want to play sports just to be around the Headless Horseman when he comes out and rides during the homecoming game. And
so is their tagline, "Heads will roll"?
Oh my gosh. Probably. Who
Play
knows?
Ball.
Play
no,
ball.
I didn't know that. I guess that makes sense. I'm surprised that I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, nice capitalization there, Terrytown. I mean, not Terrytown. I think it used to be Terrytown, but now it's Sleepy Hollow. I think they, reincorporated or something. I don't know the whole story, but your grandfather, your Lolo, your Filipino grandfather, lived up there for a spell.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I think it used to be called Terrytown, and maybe now it's called Sleepy Hollow, or maybe they're like joined by the bridge or something. I'm not sure. I haven't been up there, but apparently a pretty little area. Yeah, you go to the homecoming football game there, and you're going to get run down by the Headless Horseman if you are on the opposing team. So take that, anybody who comes to Sleepy Hollow. The Headless Horseman shares a couple of traits. I mean, not the Headless Horseman. The Dullahan shares a couple of traits with the Headless Horseman in that he carries his head around in his hands. He is headless, although he can put his head back on.
And he does ride a horse.
So
he's got those down.
So, but let's go into more of the Dullahan characteristics at this point. What are we looking at when we look at the Dullahan?
There are quite a few things, but I think my favorite part and the thing that stands out to me the most is that he has a whip made from a human spine.
That's right, a bone whip.
And that never ceases to
this guy
to tickle my fancy.
Is bad. He's awesome. I love the Dullahan, just the image of him.
He's very metal for a fairy. And that's the thing, is he's a fairy. You know, you have your other dark fairies that have pickaxes or halberds and stuff that they'll chase after you with. But just, I mean, a bone whip, a spine whip.
Yeah, there's no glitter or pixie dust here, folks.
I can't get over that. But yeah, there's that iconic image of him carrying his head under his hand, or maybe it's tucked under his leg as he's riding, and then the whip is in his other hand. And he'll actually raise his head up high in the air sometimes to see far, far away. And that's pretty spooky all to itself. But something that is interesting, because, you know, we have this image of, you know, the silhouette of the Headless Horseman in mind. Very distinctive big horse head. A lot of the times it's displayed as having, you know, fire in its nostrils or breathing fire. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the Dullahan's horse is also headless.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes that his horse has no head as well.
Yeah, that is always, I mean, that would be weird.
That's kind of terrifying.
I mean, seeing a headless guy ride around is weird enough, but then, you know, you can't see into his neck because the jacket's there. Mm-hmm. But you can see that horse's head, or the lack thereof.
Yeah, and down into its anatomy. And
mm-hmm. So that would be grotesque all by itself.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I guess it wouldn't be awesome if you see it, because if you see it, your time's probably up, or somebody close to you. But I think seeing it still would be cool.
It would be unique.
Maybe that would be the way to go.
It'd be unique.
That'd be the last thing you'd want to see something really cool like that.
The last thing I'd want to see, but
I don't know.
Other than that, he still bears those same characteristics. The long black coat, the dark attire, the black horse. It's all very consistent there. So that's pretty cool.
And he is a dark fairy, and being a fairy, he's not a wee folk. This is this is full grown, if not larger than life type of a figure.
Right, but as we'll see later on, he is associated still with those fairy mountains, at least in one aspect of him.
So the Dullahan is death's messenger. Mm-hmm. Let's go into that aspect of the Dullahan, because that's a pretty terrifying aspect.
In the fairy realm and in Ireland and some places like England and Scotland, he is a Grim Reaper. He is an omen, so if you see him, it probably means that you or someone you know is going to pass very soon. If you hear his cry, he's actually sometimes associated with the Banshee. Sometimes the Banshee will pair up with him, but whereas the Banshee is known for her
What a
keening
team!
wails. Yeah.
The Dullahan and the Banshee. That's a scary team. I don't want to play hockey against those guys.
Remind me of that later, because that actually has an older origin as well. Yeah, whereas
I bet they'd
Banshee,
smash some heads into plexiglass.
Probably. Hopefully not his own.
And screech and wail about it, too.
Yeah, I could see that. And that's just the thing, where she's known for her screeching and wailing, or her keening. He is known for only ever saying one thing when he's out and about, and that's the long, haunting call of one person's name. And that's
the name of the person that he's after.
Mm-hmm. So it's a very spooky omen all to itself.
And I have heard somewhere, and I mentioned this to you earlier, and I can't find the reference for it, and maybe somebody out there knows if it is an actuality, but it seems to me I have read somewhere in the past that the crack of the bone whip is also a call for the Dullahan. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but if it is, I'd like to find that reference again, but it's just a thought to throw out there, that crack of that bone whip. Could you imagine the cracking of that whip?
Well, there are things that certainly fit in with that. I haven't come across that, but that would be terrifying if you have that legend in mind.
But the Dullahan cannot be stopped. He is an unstoppable force. You can't get in his way. You can't throw up any kind of wards or anything and keep that guy from coming after you.
Yeah, as Death's Herald, and there are different iterations of this, but as Death's Messenger or Death's Herald, nothing can get in his way. If you lock a gate, if you bar a door, those fastenings will magically pop out on their own, and the doors will open wide as he approaches. There's this magical sense about him as well that you can't get away from this guy. But there is one thing, and nobody's ever explained why, but there is one thing that can make him leave you alone.
Yeah, he's afraid of something.
Mm-hmm. And this is actually a very specific thing. Over the years, it's kind of blended to be just the Dullahan, but the old writers, when they spoke of it, it was actually his other name of Gankion, and it was gold. He was afraid of gold.
He's afraid of gold. I wonder if that's why the leprechauns hoard their gold.
So they can't...
to ward off the Dullahan.
It makes sense. See, the Gankion, and he had another name as well, the Far de Rocha, which means the Dark Man, was kind of like the muscle for the Queen of the Fairies. So I could imagine that leprechauns probably pissed off the Queen, being as surely as they
Yeah,
were.
I'm sure they did.
So that wouldn't be too far from imagination, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, as Death's Herald, he was an unstoppable force. But for that one little thing, there were a lot of different visuals that are seen with that. Like, and this is kind of hard to read and say at the same time because of the Gaelic, but the Cocha Bower.
Let's go back just for a moment, because there are a few things that he will do to you if you try to get in his way.
Yeah, this also has to do with the Cocha Bower, but let's go over it real quick because a lot of people, like we said earlier, the Dullahan has kind of become watered down, and unfortunately a lot of the information that people have ready access to just kind of like regurgitates itself over and over again. You don't get to see, the full picture online anymore.
Right.
But yeah, it's said that if you do try to stop the Dullahan and get in his way, that he will either make a victim of you as well and carry you off. Or
Which is very much in line with fairy activity.
Yeah,
taking
kidnapping.
people off, kidnapping, stealing the child, so to speak.
But he'll also, perhaps more famously or infamously, pour a bucket of blood on you. And that's...
that's exciting.
See, I always had it in my head that this guy is just riding down the road and he sees somebody that looks at him, and the Dullahan apparently doesn't like to get looked at, so he just carries this bucket of blood around that he's going to dump on you. And that's not quite the case, but that's kind of the image that I've always grown up with.
Yeah, so if you try to get in his way, you're going to be doused with a bucket of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually will mark you as his next victim.
Yeah, and I don't
Or
know
mark you for death.
I don't know if that is more terrifying or the thing that he does with his whip. What he does with his whip is actually pretty nasty.
Gruesome.
Yeah, it's said that if you do look upon him and he doesn't want you to, that he'll crack that whip and you'll lose an eyeball.
So he whips you blind.
Yes, he might hit both eyes or he might just strike you blind in one, but it's...
Wow, the visual of having a bone whip strike your face and take out your eyes.
Like I said, it's not a happy visual at all. It's pretty darn nasty. But those three things fit in with a very specific variant of the Dullahan, and that is the Cocha Bower.
Okay.
Now, has a couple different names, like the Death Coach these days, but it actually means the Silent Coach. And there are different versions of this coach. We'll go over two just to get them out of the way real quick. There's one version that has no horses and no driver.
A driverless coach.
Mm-hmm. It is a phantom coach that will rumble through the town, and you'll hear it, but if you look outside your door, you'll never see it. And if you do see it, that's when you're kind of screwed.
Your time's up. You're marked for death at that point.
Yeah, so if it stops at your house...
Again, one of those really cool things that I want to see, but yet, if you see it, you're done.
Yep.
I want to see the Headless Horseman and the Headless Horse, and I want to see the Phantom Coach, but if I do, then I die.
I think that's where the idea of the cracking of the whip, that sound could very easily come into place, because you have the rumbling of the carriage, you have the clopping of the hooves, and I can just hear it in my own head, that crack of the whip associated with that. And
which, you go to the old country and you think about this legend centuries ago, and you think about wind whipping through the trees, or a tree being felled, or any number of things taking place in a wooded area. You can imagine that being a crack of a whip, or something really eerie, especially in the night during a storm or something.
And it should be mentioned to this day that not just in the old country, but even today, people still hear these sounds, and people still...
Well, of course they do. He's real.
Right. So, but it's still very much a spooky thing. But yeah, that's one version of the Cocha Bower. It's also said to be driven by the devil himself.
Ye old devil.
Mm-hmm. As they
you like
call
my my Gaelic tongue there, don't you?
I do.
Ye old devil. I don't do it very well. That's okay.
They also...
Ye old... Never mind.
It's
I was
fun
gonna
to
try
say,
it again, but I can't get it out right.
A lot of those old stories are written in an accent, and it's kind of funny to think of something being written in an accent, but it's
yeah,
funny.
And there's sometimes I'll be reading it out loud, and every once in a while I'll hit the stride in a sentence, and it sounds right, and I'll be like all excited because now I sound like I'm supposed to be, and then I lose it by the next sentence, and it's disappointing.
I did always find what they call the devil funny, though, because it's D-I-V-I-L. It's
Ye old devil.
Pretty fun. But yeah, that third version is, of course, our guest of the night, the Dullahan.
The Dullahan. So we have the Phantom Coach. We also have the devil himself driving that coach. And then we have the Dullahan himself.
Yeah, and this is perhaps where the Banshee is known better for hanging around him. And sometimes his coach has a coffin on the back of it to be all spooky. They just have to be completely decked out in Halloween garb there.
Of course.
But yeah,
I mean, what good is your coach going to be if you're not carrying a coffin around? That's not very scary at all.
True. I guess if you're going to have
no
a
head, headless horse, and bone whip notwithstanding.
And
if you don't have a
horses.
Coffin, whatever.
And specifically 6 horses.
Yeah, 6 horses.
But yeah, one thing to keep in mind on this as well.
That's the 6 horses. Mm-hmm. It's like the number of the devil. Okay, never mind.
But he will tap on your window. So sometimes you'll hear that.
Is this why you don't like tap, tap, tap on the window?
No, I don't like windows for other reasons, but it probably doesn't help.
So if I go outside and tap on your window...
I will not come to the window.
All right, well, Dullahan's not going to get you.
If you hear the tapping at the window, that's as well when you know it's not looking good.
Yeah, and that's disappointing because, you might think like, Jimmy from next door is coming over to play. We're going to play marbles or hopscotch or something. And you throw back the blinds and ta-da, the Dullahan. Hi, I'm here to take you away. And it's how disappointing. You think you're going to go outside and play with your friends, and yet here's the Grim Reaper come to take you away.
Yeah, his game of marbles would probably not be fun.
Can you imagine the terror in a person who's, I just want to go play with Johnny and pop some firecrackers, but here's the Dullahan. I'm dead.
Sometimes that rapping at the window, is sure death, but sometimes it also just meant that you were going to have a very prolonged illness or fever in your house. So either way, it's not something that you would want to hear whatsoever.
And there are a lot of fairies and fairy lore that is associated with long-term illness, leading to death. Sometimes for a child, I recall a couple of stories where it is actually the man or the lady of the house that contract an illness by way of a curse of a fairy. That's a kind of a common theme among dark fairies and their interaction with humans.
It is, and it's actually pretty common around the world, because if you think about it, a lot of the yokai from Japan, when we were doing our yokai month last month, a lot of those didn't necessarily cause any long-term pain or heartache or even death, but a lot of them just caused a fever. Like specifically, they just gave you a fever and then you're good. You just have to wonder if getting that scared.
Which leads me to believe that perhaps people on that long, dark, winding road, when they meet the yokai or they meet a fairy, which gives them a fever, I wonder if it's just like food poisoning and they're seeing things at that point. They're having delusions.
Maybe they just forgot their jacket and they got too cold.
They got cold, and cold sweats lead to seeing headless horsemen.
Apparently. Will-o'-the-wisp and all of that jazz.
Will-o'-the-wisp. Let's go into some origins and aspects and variations of the Dullahan, because there's some interesting study there with regards to the headless horseman.
Well, yeah. Something that's always interested me is you do have several spirits and ghosts and monsters around the world that have very strange things they do with their heads. So you have the Dullahan, who carries around his really grotesque head. You have a lot of Asian vampires whose heads detach completely and fly around.
Yep.
And then in Scandinavia, you have perhaps where a lot of those headless, where we get some of our oldest headless, just that old mythology. They believed that when you buried certain people, you would cut off their head. And that way, when the corpse, or not the corpse, but when the ghost came back looking for their treasure or whatever they left behind, the spirit was feebled and could not do as much harm as usual. So it's a bit of a different taste, because like I said, in Asia, you have vampires whose heads purposefully separate. In the Dullahan, you have this very strong, terrifying spirit that carries its head around. But in Scandinavia, where some of that myth may have come from with the Dullahan, they actually use it as a form of protection.
It's interesting. We have a strange fascination historically as a human race with this headless ghost, headless monster, or taking the head off of the beast at death or at burial. We have a strange fascination with that concept, with that monster archetype.
We do, and some of the acts that even we as humans carry out because of it, as you'll see in one of those origins of the possible origins of the Dullahan. But I kind of want to save save that for last because that's a really fun thing to get into.
Yeah, you don't want to lose your head this early in the game.
Yeah, ha 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 ha. Okay.
I had to get it in there somehow. So we have the Dullahan as a headless ghost, and we reach as far back as Scandinavian myths to see that similarity in other creatures around the world. You mentioned earlier about the Dullahan being the queen's muscle.
Yes.
The queen of the fairies.
Right.
Not God Save the Queen, but the queen of the fairies.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
That would be interesting. It's a conspiracy theory. No, this is specifically a version of the Dullahan called the Far Darocha, which means the Dark Man. You have the Dullahan, you have the Gankian, which means, without a head, and then you have the Far Darocha. And the Far Darocha is very similar, carries around that bone whip and rides around headless with his head in his hands, but he is not necessarily the Grim Reaper type. He's more of like Queen's mercenary. He does a lot of the kidnapping, taking people back under the fairy mound, not to the next life. He'll also go after people who have a problem holding their tongue, as one older author put it, gossips and braggarts. And a lot of the times he won't even kidnap them. He'll just injure.
You know what? I'd like to call on him for gossips and braggarts in this day and age. I think we need to take care of some gossip issues, especially in political season right now. I think the Dullahan could come in handy during politics.
Yeah, that bone whip would be nice. But yeah, instead of kidnapping people or taking them, he wouldn't always take them back to the fairy mounds. A lot of the times he would just punish them right then and there with his whip and maim them in some way. So he was just like the other incarnation, the Dullahan. The Far Darocha was brutal and not a nice fairy or, that winged little pixie that a lot of people are used to.
So the Dullahan as the headless ghost, the Dullahan as the queen's mercenary. We've seen him as Death's Herald, as a form, or as a Grim Reaper. And there's also one that you've been looking into lately that is very interesting. That is the Dullahan as Crum.
Crum Cruach or Crum Dow. Crum Cruach is an old god of Ireland. At the beginning of this month's podcasts, going into fairies and everything, we talked about how a lot of fairies are thought to be what survived of old gods.
Right.
In Ireland,
some of them fallen angels, some of them old gods, and so on and so forth. Yeah, go back to that original podcast at the beginning of this month, and we get into a little bit of that. But those old gods, and one of those being Crum.
Yeah, who is known as many different things. He was kind of demonized, in the changeover of Christianity in Ireland and everything, and called the Crooked One or the Black One. But originally, he was a fertility god and a king god of Ireland. And this, I've been researching this and trying to get a handle on it. I would say the link is strong. I am very curious to see the actual historical side, aside from the mythology, to know what all is truth and what all is still myth. But it basically goes like this. There are some people who believe that a North African cult or group of people actually went up to Ireland very early on. And some people believe that these are the tribes that fought with the Tuatha De Danann in mythology, like the Fomorians.
Right.
It is very possible that one of those became the figure of Crum. Crum was, again, a fertility god. He was known as, physically, a black god. And that carries over into the name of the Dullahan in the different nicknames for him of being the Dark One or the Dark Man.
Right.
Like Far Darocha literally means the Dark Man. But there's more to the story than that. Crum Cruach, being a fertility god, was worshipped heavily, particularly by one king in Ireland called Tigermas. Tigermas was very, how should I say, he was very strict about the religion with Crum, and he performed many human sacrifices in order to please Crum and bring in a good harvest. These sacrifices, though, can you take a guess at the method of sacrifice? Decapitation. Yeah, it was decapitation. And it was around the changeover to Christianity when they would actually come in and say, you can't do this anymore, you can't sacrifice these people and behead them, and kind of condemned Crum Cruach, that the narrative started to change and the Dullahan started to take shape and appear. So you have this transition from the black god to the dark man. And to me, that's fascinating. And there's a lot that goes into that. Being a god of harvest and a Grim Reaper figure, it ties very heavily into other cultural figures like Saturn or Kronos from Greek and Roman mythology, who is also kind of a Grim Reaper and harvest god.
So we have quite a bit of correlation between the Headless Horseman or or the Dullahan, going all the way back to some of those original tribes of Ireland and those old gods that were worshipped during a time in which they were demonized, coursing through history, becoming the Dark One or the Black Man or the Dark Man, riding around being known as Death's Herald. Quite a fascinating circle throughout history with this fella.
Yeah, it's very cool to think that this headless ghost that we all at least know the icon of came from a completely different tribe that had migrated up to Ireland at some point. It's really cool, and I really want to dig deeper into that part of history and see where all of those links actually end up on the page.
Yeah, so if anybody listening has any more information or a line of study or thought with regards to Crum, the old gods, or the Black God or the Dark One coming into its own as the Dullahan, let us know. We'd love to hear from you on it, and would love to have you join the conversation with us, because as always, folklore and mythology from around the world is an ongoing study for us, and uncovering some of these trinkets kind of brightens our day, even talking about dark fairies. So it's a lot of fun, and we'd love to hear from you if you have any more information about that. But the Dullahan is just, again, it's a fantastic study into fairy lore, and one that certainly has rung throughout history from story to story, from country to country, made its way over to America. I mean, we've got, books written on him, stories written on him. Now he's a high school mascot.
Yeah, even Brothers Grimm back in their day wrote about a similar figure.
It's a very exciting study. Michael, great talk about the Dullahan, and there's so much more to get into with him, and I'm sure that we're going to, in the future, we've written articles about him in the past, and we'll talk about him more in the future. Next week, though, we are going to do, similar to what we did last month with the yokai, we're going to do a fairy mashup. I'm pretty excited about this. We're going to do a rapid-fire fairy mashup podcast and end it with a little contest to see who would win between certain fairies that we pull out of the hat. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a fun week next week, and I think as well, tune in to that specifically because we're going to have another giveaway. A simple but an exciting gift to give away and mail out to somebody. I'm excited that we're mailing gifts in the mail, snail mail. A lot of people give away stuff today, and they give away digital stuff, and so you get this, and I know digital stuff can be exciting as well, but I like going back to that old feeling where you go out and you get your prize in the mailbox.
No, I understand that. I was trying to think, are you saying that we're going to send an actual book through the computer? But
we're going to, no, snail mail. We're going to send something in the mail, but we'll have another giveaway, have a mashup with fairies, rapid fire fairy round, and it'll be exciting into this month. And then the following month, we'll announce this next week, but we've got some really exciting things on tap for next month in several different levels, and just really excited to get into that. So anything else you want to say about the Dullahan tonight, or anything else, with regards to the Monster Guys podcast or fairy mythology?
No, I, as always, just sitting here thinking there are a couple things that we didn't go over, but I think those are good to leave for future exploration. And if you guys out there have any questions or want to dig deeper into the folklore with us, just holler at us and let us know, and we'd love to have that conversation with you.
Okay, good enough. It's been another great week with you at the Monster Guys podcast. Remember now, we are still doing our story podcasts a couple times throughout the week. We've got our yokai story podcast that'll come up in a couple days, and shortly following that, we'll have our fairy tales podcast where we read an original or a classic short story and then have a brief discussion on those creatures or on those monsters. So join us for those as well. Spread the word. We'd love to hear from you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just look us up at the Monster Guys. Subscribe to us in iTunes and leave us some love there. We would certainly appreciate it. And if you have anything you want to share with us or requests on future monsters, let us know. We are here for you. We love you. We appreciate you listening to us. Thank you so very much. It's a great privilege to share with you on a weekly basis about something that's close to our heart, and that is folklore, mythology, and monsters from around the world. Until our next podcast, good night.
Fare thee well.